All right, joining us now, writer-at-large for the New York Times, Amy Chozick. Her new memoir entitled Chasing Hillary, 10 years, 2 presidential campaigns, and 1 intact glass ceiling is on sale tomorrow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Great book.
Thank
Joe,
you.
You've got the first question.
Sure, and Amy, I think this is a remarkable book. It's remarkable because you're honest about your self-doubts and your insecurities as a writer, and covering this extraordinary campaign, and you're going to catch some flack because of that, but I think it's going to help other reporters in the future as they go through the same thing that you've gone through, and you've laid it out. But the part of the book that I found pretty surprising, pretty shocking, was you talked about how Hillary got in your head, but how the, quote, guys on the campaign got into your face. In fact, were pretty abusive to you, saying some sexist things and constantly demeaning you as a woman. And I'm just curious if you were struck by the irony of covering this woman who's trying to make history as a woman, who at the same time had men working for her that were abusive to female reporters.
Yeah, you know, I think they were equal opportunity in their abuse. I think my predecessor on the Hillary beat was a man, and they got in his head too. But yes, certainly some of the things they said to me, you know, would be perceived as sexist, and I did. It was ironic because Hillary Clinton would give a really inspiring speech about standing up to men and women and little girls, and I would sometimes apply her advice to dealing with her own handlers, and so there was an irony there. I mean, look, in this book, and thank you for the kind words about it, I mean, I really wanted to be honest about what it was like to cover the first woman with a shot at the presidency, and in many ways it was historic. We had more women in the press corps than we've ever had. You know, we saw a female candidate on that debate stage like we've never seen before, but in many ways it was the same old boys club of covering a campaign, and there's been going around, why didn't I report the sexual harassment earlier? Honestly, I just thought it was the usual cost of reporting while female. You know, I told friends and colleagues that it bothered me, that it was gross, but like it wasn't something that really stood out as so egregious to me. I mean, that's just what, you know, women in a lot of fields, women who cover politics, who are in politics, you know, are used to, frankly.
Yep. Well, they constantly would, you write about them saying that you were worthless, that you didn't matter, that they weren't going to talk to you, and then they would talk to your male colleagues. But there was one, I'm not going to get the specific quote because there are kids watching the show, but there was one sexual reference that was made, a quote from a Thank You for Smoking, a 2005 movie. From one of Hillary's top male aides that would have probably gotten him at least reprimanded, if not fired, in any Fortune 500 company.
Yes, I think I described that quote as grossly gynecological, but no, that one in particular really, that one disturbed me, but frankly what you said earlier was what got in my head, was that no one takes you seriously, and some of the drumbeat of just like, you're not a serious reporter and no one takes you seriously, and you know, could you please connect me to one of your other, i.e. male colleagues, you know, for this story? Who's the lead reporter on this? We'd like to talk to him.
All right. In Jim Comey's new book, the former FBI director writes this about the coverage of the Clinton email investigation. Quote, under intense pressure from the Clinton presidential campaign, the New York Times walked back a story published on July 23, 2015, reporting that the Justice Department was considering opening a criminal investigation into Clinton's handling of her emails. As a result of the Clinton team's tenacious pushback, the Times appended 2 separate corrections to its original article, first claiming that Mrs. Clinton herself was not the focus of any investigation, and then a day later changing the description of the Inspector General's transmission to the FBI from criminal referral to security referral. Though the Times may have thought those clarifications necessary, their original story was much closer to the mark. And Amy, you didn't write the article, but what can you tell us about and I think we can relate here, the pressure on your newspaper that Comey describes here, and did you ever get any?
That was one of the most tense periods of the campaign. And in fairness, I think Jennifer Palmieri, who had released the letter pushing back at the time, says that she didn't know about the criminal investigation at the time. But I was on the campaign trail, and I just remember the tension between the Times and the Clinton camp, which I write in my book, goes back to the 90s, goes back to Whitewater, was at a high point when that article was published. I remember Hillary doing a press conference, and she purposely took a question from me, which didn't always happen, because she wanted to show that she could rise above this tension. But it was incredibly tense, and there was a lot of pressure at the time. And our public editor came out very strongly, kind of against the reporting that turned out to be vindicated and accurate.
Heilman.
Congratulations, first of all, and I'm excited to read the book. I read the excerpt. I have some familiarity with this topic, and I'm most fascinated because you've been talking about gender a little bit. One of the things that I have found covering these people, this campaign in particular, was the really striking difference between how men in the campaign evaluated her chances versus the women in the campaign. It seemed to me throughout that many of the women were always thought that she was more likely to lose than the men, who seemed to be seeing things through a conventional political prism.
Right.
And she seemed to share that and doubt about whether she would win all throughout, including toward the end when she was running against Trump. So I just want you to talk about, A, the difference, and B, what explains that difference.
Oh, it's really interesting you bring that up, because it's been something I've been thinking about with Comey's book. He said there was a wide assumption that she would win, and I was like, by who? By the man? I mean, I remember covering Obama in 2008, and even though all the polls said he was going to win, I think universally, male and female thought, are we really going to elect a black president? There was still that lingering doubt right up until Election Day. And with a woman, it was like, well, the polls say she's going to win. She's obviously going to win. And I think a lot of women, also there were a lot of women in her campaign who were with her day in and day out, and sort of probably didn't feel that bubbling up excitement that, I didn't feel like it was winning until the end. I didn't really feel like it was a winning campaign.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Women and people of color are a lot more sensitive to the way that America is sexist and racist than men are. I actually think so. That quote that Philippe Reines made from "Thank You for Smoking," that was referred to as being sexist. What I think is really interesting about that quote was actually it's about a journalist in the movie. It is actually the confluence of a sexual insult with describing you as being someone who is willing to trade favors, let's say. Right. I mean, that's like the true impact of being a female on that campaign.
Who would say something like that?
Well, what I think is interesting is, like, I want to know about the resilience to that, though. Yeah. There were an unprecedented number of women on this campaign. Were you able to support each other in the face of that kind of abuse?
Yeah, there was incredible solidarity among the women. And I think there was in 2008 when most of her reporters were men. I think the traveling press does have a sense of solidarity. And frankly, Hillary has a lot of female friends, a lot of female aides that we were also close to. And some of the men were great, too. I mean, so we did have a solidarity. And a lot of the things in the book that we're talking about actually started in the pre-campaign period. So I just want to make that clear. When she left the State Department and she had just a tiny cadre of protectors, and they were, unhappy that the Times had assigned someone to the Hillary beat so early. So this was actually before the campaign started.
Amy, it's virtually impossible during the course of ongoing daily coverage of a campaign, any campaign, to assess your own accuracy or your own responsibilities. But in retrospect, and this book is amazingly refreshing in terms of self-assessment, what do you think you missed?
I mean, it's a really good point. I was frustrated. I think there's an example in the book where I spent a year trying to convince this feminist mentor of Hillary's who drove her down to Arkansas to marry Bill Clinton, and she tried to talk her out the whole time. I wanted to just recreate this road trip that showed a very vulnerable Hillary, a different side of Hillary. The campaign did not want me to do it. I had to woo this woman. It took a year. Finally, the story posts, and 3 hours later, Comey sends his letter to Congress. It didn't even run in the print paper. And so I think it was the perfect encapsulation of trying to get other stories about Hillary to break through amid the storm of emails and all of the other stories was really, really hard. And I think that, we could have done that. I could have done that better. I could have timed them differently. But, it was very difficult to get those things to break through.
Well, the book is Chasing Hillary, 10 years, 2 presidential campaigns, and 1 intact glass ceiling. Amy Chozick, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anna Marie Cox, thank you as well. Great to see you.